Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. My informative speech is on vampires. Vampires have been a part of fiction for hundreds of years. Bram Stoker wrote a book in 1887 about a famous vampire called Count Dracula. Since then, books and movies are inspired by Bram's book. In 2005, Stephanie Myers created a new vampire saga starting with Twilight. Originally adopted by female teens, Myers' book became a bestseller in 2008, but was beaten in 2009 by its sequel, New Moon. There are similarities and differences between Bram's vampire Dracula and Myers' vampire Edward. Let's begin by looking at the similarities. Both vampires begin as mortals, but become vampires after being changed by an older vampire. Both requires blood to live and sustain life after the change, rather than eat actual food. Both authors agree that blood helps with the change in both mental and physical abilities, like extra strength, speed, sight, hearing, and smell. They were also the same with supernatural abilities. Both vampires were immune to conventional means of attack, had the potential to live forever, transfer vampiric abilities to others, like changing them into vampires, and both authors agree that their vampires are not harmed by the sun. With these similarities in power, there were also differences in power. They differed in mental power, where Dracula had strong hypnotic and telepathic abilities. Dracula was able to control nocturnal beasts such as rats and wolves. He could pass through tiny cracks in his natural form, manipulate weather and storms, and he could shape-shift at will, like bats, wolves, vapor, and fog. Edward's mental powers are minimal compared to Dracula's Edward. Compared to Dracula's. Edward could read minds of everyone except his love. The author's thoughts on the blood drinking to satisfy hunger differ as well. In Bram's book, Dracula drank human blood, and that only human blood could satisfy a vampire. In Myers' book, Edward is what you'd call a vegetarian vampire. Myers believed that animals' blood could satisfy a vampire, and that it didn't matter what kind of blood they drank. In Myers' books, Edward and his family drink animal blood, and when Bella was pregnant in the fourth book, she drinks donated blood from the hospital's storages. And the other vampires who are not vegetarian drink human blood. And Bram's Dracula didn't have a choice and didn't care enough about human life to care. It's not just in physical strengths, powers, or weaknesses that they are alike or different. It is in their personal characteristic lives as well. In the two different stories, Dracula is a count, a nobleman. Dracula lives with 3 vampiric women, and his main purpose was to add women to his harem. Dracula felt sorry for the humans for being human, and he had pride about his heritage. Dracula proclaimed his pride to Harker on how the Skazikli people are infused with blood heroes, and expressed his interests with the history of the British Empire. Edward's personal life was different. He was more family-oriented. He had 4 vampire siblings and fell in love with Isabella Swan. Edward missed being human and feared for his soul. Therefore, he worked very hard to keep Bella from being changed, protecting her from his family and other opposing vampires. Since Edward missed being human, he worked to keep the humans human, and did not want to change Bella even though she insisted on being changed, for the fear of her out-aging Edward, like becoming 18 while he was 17. In Myers' book, Edward was in high school. She based her book on a vampire high school drama, whereas in Brown's book, Dracula was more of a manipulative brute, trying to change the women around him into vampires. Also, right now, I would say that Edward is more popular than Dracula in looks and book popularity, but at Halloween, Dracula is a more famous one because the vampire costumes say Dracula on them instead of Edward. I read several vampire books, and I read the Twilight series too that people were so excited about, but because of how Dracula was written, I did not read it. I watched the movie. I think that Dracula was a better vampire than Edward because he was more beast-like. I like excitement and a little of horror in my books. I prefer vampires to that drink human blood and not sparkle in the sunlight. I also like Dracula because of the powers that he possesses. I believe that the more power, the better the vampire.
Okay.